Welcome back to Bible 201, Week 7. This will be the last in our series of the Introduction to the Hebrew Bible. Week 8 will be a recap and summary week. So I hope that you have gained a lot when it comes to just your willingness and your ability to jump into the Old Testament without feeling intimidated or overwhelmed. Now, that being said, this week is probably the toughest week dealing with. Um, this entrance into the final week of understanding the Hebrew Bible because it deals with the devastation and the exile of the Hebrew nation, the difficulty of which leads to a lot of hard text, a lot of difficult sayings from the prophets. So let's jump right in. So we ended last week with the end of the succession of Solomon. Now, when he goes to live with his ancestors, as the scriptures put it, we find that the infighting that was already present really reaches a fever pitch. And before long, the nation of Israel divides into two, the northern and the southern kingdoms. Now, we see pretty quickly after Solomon's death, the prophet Ahijah comes and actually splits his robe into 12 pieces and gives two of the pieces to the incoming king for the southern kingdom and the other 10 to the northern future king. So, in that, the symbolic act of what is to come. Now, as we see the breaking of this covenant, we also see that the covenant is broken in multiple ways, not just that the nation is divided, but that the commandments stop being followed, idols start being worshipped, and pretty soon Assyria comes in for the kill. Now, if you want to remember the order of these pieces of Hebrew history, you just have to remember your ABCs. So I comes before J, right? So Israel is the northern kingdom, and Judah is the southern kingdom. Then there's the ABCs of Assyria, Babylon, and Cyrus of Persia. Assyria is the first to come in and to ransack the northern kingdom of Israel. Then eventually Babylon will take over and ransack the southern kingdom of Judah. And it is Cyrus of Persia who will send the last of the exiled Jews back home to their previous homeland. But no longer is it the nation of Israel that they once knew. They are Jews, foreigners, returning to what had been their promised land. Now, the northern kingdom looked down upon the southern kingdom. They called the Jews in Judah foreigners. They moved a capital to Shechem. But in the end, they were actually the first to fall to the Assyrians. They refused to pay tribute, and first Samaria was taken over, and then eventually the whole of the country. The Assyrians invented this method of deportation and exile. Now, as the northern kingdom was falling to the Assyrians, there was a king in the southern kingdom, Hezekiah, who was seen as keeping the commandments of God, seeking repentance on behalf of his people. And while he reigned, God favored him and his people. But as soon as Hezekiah died, we see a quick succession of leaders, many of whom were assassinated well within their first year of succeeding to the throne. It was a time of significant coups and chaos, again, within the remnant of Judah. So, as the southern kingdom falls, we see basically the ending of the historical writings of the Hebrew Bible with Kings, and then a replay of what happens in Samuel and Kings with Chronicles. And the rest of the books of the Hebrew Bible are the prophetic writings and the individual stories of people living in the time of the exile. Now, the prophets are an interesting bunch. They are unique, each in their own right, but they're a part of a larger system at the time that was known as proclaimers or seers. Now, it was very much the custom of the ancient Middle East that there would be institutions or guilds of prophets. Kings of all different nations had guilds of prophets. But what's different about the biblical prophets, especially the ones whose names are given to title various books within the Old Testament, they're essentially freelancers. They aren't part of the institution. In fact, they're speaking typically truth to the institution. Nathan is really the great exception to this rule. But each of the prophets come forward to critique what's going on. Now, there are a couple basic critiques they give: political critiques, social critiques, and critiques on the faith of the people to call them to remember the covenant that they have forgotten and that they have left. It's essential to remember that each of the prophetic writings are being written in the middle of a context of real historical happenings, things that we know, at least to some degree, truly happened. We see, for example, Isaiah in the midst of an urban environment speaking truth to power, and Micah in the midst of a rural area attempting to give a reminder, a call to come back to the covenant. We see that in the midst of the Babylonian exile, Habakkuk and Jeremiah and Lamentations are written. And so with each one of the prophetic writings, it's essential that you go back and look at the context. When was this being written? What are they talking about? Because they can feel hopeless, they can seem odd or frightening or just downright mean-spirited. But once you look and see, okay, where was this prophet? When were they writing? What's going on? You see the context and the reason why there is so much feeling and emotion, because literally life as they know it is falling apart. Now, there is tremendous hope that we see in the midst of dire straits. A reminder from Isaiah that there is a remnant still in Judah. And as Christians, we look through this context and we see that the bigger story of reconciliation didn't stop there, that it continued on. And that is truly just a miraculous gift that we have, to be able to say our story doesn't begin with Jesus, but Jesus is the fulfillment of our understanding of that Davidic covenant that God made such a long time ago, that even though the kingdom created within the human realms failed, that there's a larger kingdom that is still being brought to this day. So friends, I invite you, open up your Old Testament, your Hebrew Bible, dig through those scriptures, ask questions, seek out answers and context. And I truly have been blessed by this journey with you. I pray that you have been as well. I look forward to your continued questions and your feedback as you check out this series, as you share it with others. Blessings, y'all.